All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. It is about that time. Thanks for jumping on to our webinar. I'm Andy Sulak. I'll be taking you through today's webinar on AVD and Microsoft AVD and Intune. I have a couple other colleagues that are joining me, but let me kind of get things rolling here. Let's move things along, give you a little overview of the agenda. So we'll go through our panelists. I'll give you a bit more about XenTegra as we're hosting this for you. And then we'll get into Intune and AVD. I'll give you an overview of it. Some of you might be very familiar with it. Others might be like, yep, heard of it. We'll go through that a little bit, a few items that are new. Then we'll talk about AVD provisioning and some shortcuts and cool other technology to use with it on that front. Some industry scenarios, and then also finish with a couple client examples, because as XenTegra, we have many, many clients, and Mark Vincent, who you'll see his lovely face here in a moment. Actually, probably already do. He'll go through that. So let's move on. So today, I'm Andy Sulak, Microsoft Practice Director for XenTegra. Bill Sutton is with us in spirit. He's actually at a conference, and he's our practice director for Modern Workspace, but he probably won't be able to join us. And then Mark, if you want to do a quick intro, and then you can pass it to Randy.
Sure. Mark Vincent, President of XenTegra One. I handle all XenTegra customers that are generally 250 users and below. So we're the SMB arm of XenTegra.
And hey, good afternoon, guys. Randy Price. I'm a solutions architect with XenTegra. Been with XenTegra for about 8 years. Been in the end user compute space for 20 plus years at this point, specifically focusing again on that EUC space, right? So, yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right. So let's move on to who is XenTegra. I'll actually just move along to a little quote from our founder, Andy Whiteside, who started XenTegra back in 2012, came out of the EUC space himself, long time at Citrix. And we were born out of a need for customer enablement and true partnership, really with the idea that a lot of value-added resellers are just reselling and not really adding value. So doing things like what we're doing here today, we really want to add value. Obviously, we're here to help when you need, but it's not only when it's just transactions. So let me expand out a little bit more of XenTegra. So here we've got our where we are around the globe. We've started headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, but have expanded over time. We have XenTegra LLC, which is based in the United States. We've got XenTegra Canada, which is just north of us. That does in-country work for Canada as well as with the other XenTegra companies. Then just off the East Coast, we've got XenTegra India, which does in-country work for India as well as offshoring if needed. This allows us to have a lot of flexibility in the services and coverage we have, including, follow the sun around the clock for some of our services that I'll go into a little bit more. So, and our main focus is to engage, listen, and deliver appropriate technologies to clients of all sizes. That's what we focus on each day, every day, so that we really want to coin the term. Well, I don't know if it's coining the term, but be the VAR 2.0, which is what I said earlier, not just about the reselling, but actually being a real partner, driving your success by adding value. And as part of that, we have a number of community building aspects. We do a lot of events, a lot of a lot of marketing. We do webinars like you have today. And on that point, and I'll mention this a couple times, we have this webinar right now. Next Friday, the 28th, not tomorrow, we actually have an AVD demo day. And you actually should see a link kind of down there if I'm pointing in the right direction. So if you want to register for that, if you haven't. But we do all kinds of, podcasts, local events to build community and support that community. And along with that, we offer 90% off industry conference passes. So you can see some of those in the background there. Of one particular interest to me is Microsoft Ignite 2025, which is coming up in San Francisco in November this year, as well as others. So we want you as part of the community to attend these conferences, to learn more, to network, and we have signups for you. See the XenTegra.com/conference. That's where you can find sign up forms to and let us help you get registered for that. In addition, we also do complimentary assessments. We call them micro assessments. It's a half day effort from our senior solution consultants. There we go. Where we'll go in, whether it's for EUC, ServiceNow, VMware, number of different assessments that are complimentary. And then what we give you is a SWOT analysis, what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, which is a good, level set and another set of eyes that we offer complimentary. And as part of that, we're a one-stop shop where we have our consulting for professional services. We also provide support. Yes, we sell licenses and product. We also will do hosting. I mentioned earlier, we do near and offshoring of for resources. And then we also do managed services. So if you just need some help, we can do that on, for AVD, Intune, whatever. If you actually want hosted solutions, and then you want us to do full management or just manage part of the environment, we can provide that. And I think this is a good quote from one of my colleagues, Philip Sellers. He's practice director for Modern Data Center. Came up with, we're a bit like Ace Hardware, a little more specific about what we put on the shelf, more knowledgeable than your typical big box store. Again, that's what we strive to do, not just sell everything, not just provide everything under the sun, but the best of breed and be able to deliver it and architect it appropriately. So going across our practices here, to back up our expertise, we have I mentioned managed services, that's headed up by Trevor Mansell, which is everything in managed services as well as DR as a service, which is becoming more and more popular because it's so much fun to handle on your own. We've come up with a great set of solutions around that, as well as other managed services. And then flowing into modern applications, that's where on top of your IT infrastructure, platforms like ServiceNow to automate everything, Salesforce, and as well as AI-driven application platforms and insights, headed up by Fred Reynolds. And Aaron Banner leads up our security and networking practice, which is becoming more, both Aaron, Phil, and I actually share a bit of an overlap since I handle Microsoft, but of course that spills into security and networking, and then also modern data center with Philip Sellers. Bill Sutton, who you saw earlier, he's over all of our modern workspace, which includes Microsoft. And then you heard from Mark, who's president of XenTegra One, which is our small and medium business. And just adding a little bit more definition to the managed services, this gives you a bit more of an idea of across the type of deployments, consulting, and then managed services we do, and the different disciplines that fall underneath the managed services within each of the practices. So that all maps through into our managed services division. And Brian Clark, who's actually our chief architect and technology officer for our managed services arm, has his, would you rather a brand new pilot fly your plane or a pilot who has flown 1,000 times before? And I think this is not only limited to, but when it comes to also doing disaster recovery failover. So, and that's one of the areas that we see a lot of growth and are happy to talk with you about that if that's of interest. And really, when it comes down to it, our blueprint is pretty simple. We want to help and provide workspaces using, the best vendors, the best consultants, using managed services where appropriate, adding in a real world experience for, less lag, latency, clicks, enhanced security, better flexibility and productivity. And then I would be remiss if I didn't include the last XenTegra company, which is XenTegra Cares, which is our nonprofit arm where we focus on not only helping nonprofits and meeting their budgets and needs, but also giving back to communities. This is actually just from a couple months ago at our kickoff grant. There, we were putting together some hygiene bags for a local women's shelter for our company kickoff. So that's part of XenTegra Cares, as well as many other efforts to serve those communities. And then we also have our NASCAR slide, or sorry, our list of vendors. Just a few, but just to give you an idea of the breadth of what we cover, what we work with. So when it comes to finding the right solution, we have a few things to pick from, but ones that we've worked with, we've had good success from. More importantly, our clients have had good success from, and that's who we continue with. And then that's led us to a number of awards over the years, which speak for themselves. Going back quite a while across the EUC storage cloud space. And altogether, that creates the XenTegra difference. And let's move on to what we want to talk about here. So, Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktops, or AVD. If you're familiar with it, might be a little bit redundant, but I like to go through it anyway. So, we've got it's Microsoft's virtual desktop offering, completely built on Azure. So it by default or generally is completely cloud hosted, meaning no on-prem infrastructure, with a little caveat for my next point. But that also means doesn't take up space in your data center and allows you to scale up and down on demand. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But instead of just putting resources up in the cloud, which, sometimes you need them always on, other times, especially when it comes to end user compute, it might be better and definitely at times could be more cost effective to just have resources on demand when they're needed. So the scaling up and down is built into that. But if you did need specific resources and you needed to have some on-prem infrastructure, there is hybrid support for virtual desktops using Azure Local and Azure Arc. All of this is integrated with Entra, Microsoft 365, and Azure Storage. And one thing that is a bit newer is multi-session support for Windows 11. We've had multi-session support for Windows Server for years and years and years, although it's actually been part of the desktop kernel, but it really hasn't been allowed or exposed. So with Windows 11, one of the benefits you get in Azure Virtual Desktops is doing multi-session. So you can get I'll say the appropriate density. As someone that's been doing EUC for a long time, whenever I hear high density, I'm like, it kind of depends on the application. So I always like to keep that in mind. You can get the appropriate density for the desktops and applications that you need to deliver to your staff and users. And then also secure access from any device, whether it's Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, and even above and beyond those. So just a quick overview of AVD. And then moving into Intune, Microsoft Intune is the endpoint management platform, which has evolved from, showing how long I've been doing this, SMS, which became System Center Configuration Manager, SCCM, and then MECM, which is still around, but then has evolved into the cloud counterpart, which is Intune. Can be completely in the cloud. Has both mobile device management, so if you want to control, I'll say mobile as well as endpoint device management, completely control endpoints you can, but as well as mobile application management, which allows you to deploy and control just certain parts or applications within an endpoint, whether it's fully managed or not, which gives you that flexibility across your workforce as well as BYOD initiatives, provides application delivery, of course, Microsoft apps, line of business, even deliver, SaaS apps, as well as, of course, MSI, MSIX apps. Secure access and policies for zero trust. This allows you to lock down endpoints or apply the policies that are right for your business and your organization. Again, just like AVD, integrated with Entra, Microsoft 365, and Defender to really round out the ecosystem for management. And as I mentioned, as far as the what you can actually manage, Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and a number of Linux distributions. But getting a little bit more into what we're interested in, what happens when you combine the two together, because Intune's been around for a while, AVD has been around for a little while. But what do we get when we put the two together? Actually, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna put my colleagues on the spot. So Mark and Randy, you've been around Microsoft for a while, so you know that there's a number of products that have had code names, right? So there's products that get released, and then there's certain code names that they're given, right? So we're going to be talking a little bit about Windows 10. I'm going to talk, Windows 10, Windows 11. I know many on the call might still have Windows 10. Everybody is hopefully moving to Windows 11, at least by the end of this year, as far as support. Any idea what a Windows 10 code name, so this is that internal project name from Microsoft, is? Are you Googling this, Mark? You're on camera, right?
I was going to cheat a little bit because I knew you were going to put me on the spot. There's one that gets talked about all the time with AVD. Scott Manchester, if you guys know him, he's kind of like the VP, vice president of AVD for Microsoft. And every Scott Manchester thing I've sat in on, and I've sat on a lot of them over the years, he mentions this one every time. And of course, I'm having a total brain meltdown. I cannot remember the name of the code. It's not the Windows 10 one though, specifically.
Yeah.
So you got me on that. Maybe Randy's got it.
I did not prepare. I did not know there was going to be a quiz. I'm having a brain lapse myself.
That was partially on purpose. So for Windows 10, the first code name was Threshold. And I say the first because then after the 1600 builds, it switched to Redstone. And then Windows 11, I'm assuming you don't have Windows 11 either. That's Sun Valley. So it's kind of a little bit nicer project name. Now, what's interesting, and I don't know if you heard different, Mark, but like for AVD and Intune, no project names, or at least no internal project names.
Oh, there's one for AVD.
Was there? Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right.
It's literally if you ever get a chance to, and Scott Manchester is a fantastic speaker. He usually goes to all these events and he does a presentation about AVD. He brings this up every single time. And
every time. Okay.
And of course, I can't think of the name. And I used to have it off the top of my head. I could just say it. I was trying to see if I could find it, but there is definitely a code name for AVD internally at Microsoft.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, so then I sit waiting to be corrected. I'll put it that way. And that'll be something that we can bring up on the demo day next Friday as part of that, right? So we'll revisit that. And then also, if you guys want to come up with questions, you can ask me to catch me off guard. Well, everything will balance out. So, okay, well, why don't we get back to what we're talking about? So when we actually put Intune and AVD together, that's where we get a number of benefits. You get, unified management. It's all within the Microsoft ecosystem between the Intune Admin Center and the Azure portal. You have cloud management across both the devices, the sessions, the access to it, the conditional access policies, the security policies, the application delivery, even into all of your malware protection and all the other parts of the ecosystem that work together for that. From a licensing benefit perspective, if you have Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, then that actually includes Windows, I'm going to say Windows 10 or Windows 11 Enterprise, which has license for AVD, allows you to use AVD and also licenses for Intune. So if you just have Windows 10 or Windows 11 Enterprise, E3 or E5, both of those are also included, and even Microsoft 365 Business Premium will also include those. So there might be a good chance you actually have the licensing for it, and then it's just a matter of the consumption. And then in addition, it allows you to create a consistent experience across, your virtual desktops, but then also your endpoints, actual desktops, PCs, laptops, within your environment and centrally manage that. So it really just adds on to that end user compute real estate that you have to manage and try to keep it, I'll say, as simple as possible. Again, because, I've been doing this for a while. So the term simple is a big gray area. So we'll say as simple as possible. So I was going to go through a couple recent new things in Intune and AVD. Now, there's always a laundry list of new things that are being released for it, but I think a couple things of point or of interest is Intune Endpoint Privilege Management. So this allows you to actually, um, grant access for end users without giving admin rights, but allow things to be either run as administrator or allow certain elevated rights. This has been expanded for 64-bit ARM devices, which is something that myself and actually my colleague Randy ran into, that we actually tried some of the newer Snapdragon builds, and and this was a couple months ago, we ran into some limitations with that. Well, that's been updated with Intune, so for those for ARM devices. And then a couple things for really the support side around device query for multiple devices. It used to be a one-to-one issue for querying information on devices. Now you can pull multiples, easier to find stuff. Along those lines, you also can get more detailed information on the home page, so that when you're trying to do remediation or just get information on an endpoint or a desktop, a lot more that's been included, expanding that visibility and monitoring of that. And then also remote help. Using Intune remote help is now, and this has been out about a month or two, so it's recent. Multi-session. So prior to that, it was, hey, if you're just using multi-session Windows 11 systems, the remote help would just treat it as one endpoint, but now you can actually do remote help by session, which allows you better support to take advantage of those features. So, and then moving on to AVD, again, a few things of note. Improved multimedia redirection, as well as controls for the redirection. There's a bit more granular control of how multimedia redirection is done using the local endpoint resources to deal with, audio, video, things like that. AppV support is included in App Attach. So when you're actually delivering applications through to your virtual desktops in AVD, App Attach will support AppV. There's better support for screen capture protection. So in those environments where you want to prevent screen capture, that's been expanded for high security environments or ones that just want to leverage that. There's actually a quick start for Windows 11 multi-session. So if you actually want to do a quick, it's kind of like an abbreviated quick start deployment to test it out. That's actually been released So you can do a quick provisioning of some multi-session virtual desktops. Expanding the support for high security environments. I mean, segueing from these screen capture protection. There's also the GCC, GCC High, and DoD tenants now support AVD. And then also RDP short path has been is actually in preview, but that allows private connectivity to remote resources. Really allows you to have more of a direct connection to your virtual desktop in Azure instead of any additional latency or hops that might be included in gateway services. So, and then also FIDO and passkey support has been actually expanded. It's actually been there, but now for iOS and Mac OS, that's been expanded for those endpoints. If you're looking for passwordless authentication, which is becoming more and more popular. So, all right, well, that's a lot of talking from me. So I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Randy.
All right. So let's talk about provisioning with AVD, right? So there's really a couple of ways to get started. One, Andy, you kind of already hit on the fact that there's a quick start, right, with Windows 11 multi-session. So, very quickly being able to stand up, I would call it a demo environment, right, in the sense that they're going to pre-provision you a Windows 11 instance, that's in your environment. It takes about 20 minutes. They're going to configure a resource group, the network, that sort of thing. It's going to go through this whole sort of wizard deployment. It takes about 20, 30 minutes. And you're going to have a small environment just to kind of kick the tires on, right? Just from a demo perspective. Moving the other option where it's more of a do-it-yourself, there's some requirements. And same with quick starts. Let me just be clear about that. You still have to have an Azure tenant. You still have to register the AVD resource provider, right? So regardless if you're using quick start or you're doing it yourself, right, I'm going to actually stand up an environment or POC, both of those items will need to take place. Following that, you'll typically create a resource group, and then within it, right, you'll create your host pools, your workspace, your application groups, right? Your workspace is essentially think of it as the portal, right? The users are going to log into, and the application groups are how you're grouping the applications and assigning those to users. You're also going to create your session host, right? Now, those can be pooled or static session host. In the sense of, think of it not like non-persistent desktops or static desktops or even multi-session, right? And you have the capability also to configure remote apps, right? So if you want to publish remote apps versus a full desktop, all of that sort of capabilities there. And when we look at this and we look at it on the screen, it looks pretty simple, right? When we talk about this native AVD, but when we start looking at configuration items, especially when we talk about scale, right? Talking about adding multiple images, multiple users, and really starting scaling, that's where things become a little more challenging. And if you want to go to the next slide, it's really where, if you can't really talk about AVD without talking about Nerdio, right? It's because Andy's already talked about Intune and the power of Intune and AVD together. So, we'd say good is just AVD in the sense that, hey, it's there, it works. If I've got a small scale environment, maybe I'm able to manage it with native AVD. But as you start to scale, especially if you're coming from a Citrix or an Omnissa or one of these other VDI solutions, right? If you're coming from that platform where, from an admin perspective, you had a lot of flexibility, you're going to find that to be a little challenging in the native AVD side, right? Not without using some scripting and, there's some additional things that would need to be done. And so a lot of customers, when they're making that migration, if they're coming from that background from a Citrix or an Omnis, and they've got multiple images, large scale deployments, maybe multiple regions they need to support, that's where Nerdio really kind of fits the bill, right? It kind of fills that gap from an admin experience. And if you want to go to the next slide as well. So a lot of customers ask, okay, well, what does Nerdio provide? Like I said, that admin experience that we're all typically accustomed to, right? Nerdio sort of fills that gap. So, it's going to provide things that you don't necessarily get with native AVD without some customization, some scripting, things of this nature. Cost optimization being a big one, right? So the ability to help scale, there's some advanced auto scaling that is in play there to help save on cost. There's actually within their auto scale feature set, They have some analytics built in, so it'll actually even recommend, number of reserved instances you should reserve versus pay as you go, right? So that you're really looking to take advantage from a cost perspective. Really helps with the deployment of AVD as well from a scalability and timing perspective. If you walk through setting up AVD, or if you've been down this path before, even things like setting up Azure files, your storage account, having to join that, right, to the domain from an authentication perspective, it can be very time consuming. It can take quite a bit of time. And so AVD with Nerdio, right, really helps optimize that. It's very simplistic. This happens all behind the scenes. Nerdio has done a great job of integrating a lot of those tasks that either require scripting or is more of manual. Nerdio has really provided that admin experience to really speed that deployment. Also providing that AVD lifecycle management. If you think about it, one of the challenges, especially when you start talking about multiple images, right, is how do I keep those images updated, right? And how do I keep my applications updated? So Nerdio provides the capability to essentially go out. You can schedule things around it for image updates after Patch Tuesday. Go out, download the latest image, deploy the latest version of FSLogix for profile management, install your applications and attach those, right? And then away you go. And you can schedule that during whatever time frame for rolling that out, and have the capability to scale up and scale down your host pools as needed from a consumption perspective. This is very powerful from a management perspective or an admin perspective. Especially even things like self-healing capabilities. So Nerdio provides self-healing capabilities. If it senses that the AVD agent, right, is not registered, there's a problem with it. If it's unhealthy, it'll just delete the session host and recreate it for you automatically. So this is, again, very powerful, very, very important, especially from an admin perspective, especially as we look to scale, right? So when you have customers that are looking to deploy in a single region versus maybe they need to have multiple regions. Maybe it's from a DR perspective. Nerdio can manage all that for you and provide that single pane of glass for both AVD and Intune.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate that. I think it wasn't Nerdio created originally? It was
They were an ISP.
Yeah.
They were an MSP
yeah.
themselves, and found that managing AVD was just very, very difficult, which I can attest to that personally. It could be challenging. They wrote scripts, and it turns out that their scripts were so good, people started asking them, "Hey, can you share the secret sauce that you're doing on your end with others?" And they ended up turning it into a business in itself. And they're no longer an MSP. They're a very successful software company at this point.
Yes.
Yeah. And another example of as XenTegra's been working with Microsoft for a long time with AVD. Hey, here's an expansion of that ecosystem to make it much easier to manage, much more scalable, by just right tool for the job. So
yeah, I guess that's this thing, right? You think about it, again, kind of going back to if you're an admin coming from one of the other solutions, you're typically accustomed to something like Citrix with MCS and the management capabilities, right? Come into Nerdio, come into native AVD, and it's okay, where are these features? And so not necessarily that you can't do that, but it requires a lot of customization and scripting. And so having something like Nerdio provides that management that you were typically accustomed to. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So just a couple examples, kind of mapping the AVD and Intune to different industries. Whether it's financial services, a lot of it around, again, security, big surprise, but taking the conditional access, and that's not only from, by using that with AVD as well as Intune, it can be conditional access based on the endpoint that's trying to get to the resources, trying to get to an AVD desktop, and then conditional access of what can be accessed once you're in the desktop. All that can be enforced and consistent, and then reporting on what's compliant, what isn't, and then also setting rules and policies around that compliance, for physical and virtual. Healthcare is kind of near and dear to my heart. I worked in healthcare most of the first half of my career, whether it was hospitals or other medical systems. And so the ability to deliver applications in an environment where I was going to make a really bad joke. I still think I am. There are patients, but there's not a lot of patients. That was terrible. I get it, but just needs to be fast. There's the level of care, especially in different types of units within the healthcare system, being able to deliver a desktop that's quick and gives staff exactly what they need and no more is very important. And then being able to actually craft that and deliver it with AVD and Intune is incredibly powerful and sometimes really necessary in a lot of environments. And then for education, remote learning has really exploded over the last couple of years. I wonder why. And so enabling more of that, expanding that, enabling that, allowing schools and education systems to scale not only, what they can deliver, but being able to do more with less because of centralized and consistent management across that is a big bonus in that industry. And each industry has, a lot of different ones. We just kind of picked a few to highlight. And actually for some more specifics on that, I'm gonna pass it over to my colleague Mark to go through a few examples that he can talk about.
Happy to. Thanks, Andy. First up, what I wanted to, the better best, right? So we'll start with the best. Sort of, you were talking earlier. The best example I can use for, using Nerdio and AVD and having regions and all kinds of custom images. We have a large accounting firm today that we work with that's using AVD to augment staff offshore. So their business model is somewhat changing. They're adding a lot more employees. 10 this morning before I got on this call. And it's a weekly thing with them, 10, 15 employees every single week right now. They're really exploding in growth. But they're doing most of that through Argentina, resources in Argentina and resources in the Philippines. And we have the challenge of basically setting up AVD, giving them regional access so that their connection time's fast, their experience is good. We've created multiple regions that they can work out of. And even within those regions, we have specific builds for specific clients of theirs. So, if they're doing accounting for a law firm, they may have a set of tools that they're using, which is slightly different than maybe an accounting for a hospital. So there's different builds depending on the employee, depending on the vertical maybe that they're going after in that specific set of employees. We manage all of that through Nerdio today, and it's phenomenal. It just works. We're able to keep up our images. We're able to deploy stuff really quickly. And we're using Windows 11 multi-session to do that. So we're saving them a lot of money. We're using auto scaling to basically when people show up during their workday, as the load increases, we're automatically scaling new clients, AVD client or AVD services to different clients. And then as their workday kind of closes for the day, we're shutting those off to save money. And Nerdy will do even shutting the machine off. They'll take the disk storage that is being utilized. When it's in play, it's running with like SSD. It's very fast. When the machines are shut off, it will literally shut the machine off, take the storage that was being used, move it to a lower tier storage to save money that way. And it does this automatically. We don't have to think about it. I was curious, Andy, you mentioned sizing, right? What do you see as a typical amount of sessions that you see on Windows 11 before it auto scales typically? What do you think that the number is? Because I have real world experience with this. I'm just curious to see what your number would be. You put
what my guess is? Ooh,
I'm playing.
Okay, all right, that's fair. That's fair.
Yep.
So at what number of sessions on a multi-session Windows 11 will
what do you
Nerdio
think is a safe
trigger?
Number, right? What is a typical? Let's use the accounting firm as an example because I know their numbers are.
Okay. I'm gonna say 4, to to be honest.
You're right there. Okay.
Am I?
Get you with
Okay.
that one,
That was
right?
a total guess, but you can also tell I've been doing EUC for a while. So
Yeah, we find that power users somewhere around 3 before it kicks
Mhm,
off to another one. If it's more basic type of users, we see maybe closer to 5, but it's somewhere
mm,
between that 3 and 5 on the average. But still, the cost
mhm,
savings compared to having an individual VM for every user is huge,
mhm.
especially when you're talking about hundreds of users using the system daily. It really does add up. It's a big
Yeah.
cost saving.
Yeah.
But you got me on that one. Um, we're
Pure
using,
luck. Pure luck.
yeah, the accounting firm that we're talking about too is actually part of a bigger we use Nerdio MSP, which is a product that it's basically Nerdio, but it's also set up for multi-tenancy. So a lot of my customers are, again, sub 250. So a lot of these guys don't have a very large IT staff in their companies. Some don't have an IT staff at all, and we do everything for them. This allows us to be able to offer a solution that's somewhat complicated, which AVD is. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It allows us to deploy that in a very simple manner and maintain it for them without them having to really have much involvement other than they make the request of what they need and we're able to deliver that in a very fast and timely manner. So another shout out to Nerdio. I just like the product. It's great.
Hey,
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
hey, Mark, real quick, just going to ask you a quick question because this came up. Someone asked, what size VMs are those that you mentioned from a sizing perspective with the 4 users?
That's a great question. I want to say it's the B32S, if that makes sense. Um, if I'll find out whoever the is in there asking the questions. Is that Asif or Bill Grover? Bill, I'll get you my exact sizing off of there and let you know. It's a standard build. It's nothing large at all. It's actually a very mid-range server. The cost is pretty inexpensive too, as far as monthly usage on it. But I can follow up and I'll get you that answer. We found that we use that same one pretty much as our default. I just never remember Microsoft's terminology for that. They really do need to come an easier way. They should just call it Windows 11 Medium. Something simple instead of all these numbers and letters.
Well, I'm sure the names will change at some point.
Yeah.
You've been doing
And
this
then
for a
what the
while.
funny thing is about Nerdio too is that they will recommend as you're building out, they will update the image to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck when it deploys. So Microsoft is constantly adding to their server farm. And what you maybe deployed with originally was good, but at the same cost, you can get a better machine and they'll make
Mm,
recommendations for that as you deploy. I don't know if you've ran into that, but it's phenomenal. Their cost
mhm.
matrix calculator deal that looks at all this as you're deploying it has a lot of these features built in. And yeah, if you're running the same one, they'll actually recommend a newer version if it's available, which they can help you figure out the cost on that. So that'd be my better or best. Actually, that's the best. No, I'm sorry, better. I forget which one is which, right? Which is better or best? The large accounting firms, Nerdio, AVD, there's a little bit of Intune sprinkled in there, not much, to be
That
honest.
would be best. That was the best.
Best.
All 3.
Uh,
Yeah.
Better is my second example, right? We've got a
Mhm.
biotech startup using AVD. They're using it to centralize access control to research data. So they have a hybrid environment. They have their own data center that they manage and maintain that has a lot of computational clusters in it, right? A lot of HPC stuff. So they're doing uh, DNA analysis for protein degradation and all kinds of stuff. I really don't understand, but it sounds cool, right? The data that they're producing they're uploading the results data into Azure, and their scientists are then looking at those results. But their biggest concern is intellectual property, right? They have
Mhm.
what could potentially be $1 billion drug or a breakthrough in science sitting on this Azure setup. They didn't want to have anyone be able to just log in and look at this. So what they did is they kind of almost created an AVD layer as a DMZ. So they are able to log in, use AVD to query servers that are doing the reports and the final analysis stuff in Azure, but they're doing it using an AVD session that only has access to that data. And you brought up like screen capture, right? We're enabling,
Mhm.
right? So that you can't, when you're in that session, you can't access any kind of local drive. You can't take a screenshot. You can simply look at the results And there are some tools for data sharing that they control that are inside of the AVD image that allows them to manipulate the data and do what they want to, but it's done in an extremely secure fashion to protect.
Nice. That's a great example of like zero trust.
Yeah, exactly.
And a
It's
good
exactly a
implementation.
zero trust environment. Yeah, they don't want any outside ability to exfiltrate this data out. So everything that they build, and they're using AVD as a vehicle for accessing that data, which I think is a pretty cool use case for it.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yep.
Nice.
So those are the two I have today to
All
talk
right.
about. You know.
That's excellent. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for going
Mhm.
through that. It's always good to, hear, okay, here's the names, here's the products, here's the features, but how are they actually being used? Who's actually using them? How are they being used? How is it actually, delivering value, solving problems? So thanks for rounding that out and giving us some of those examples. So, and that takes us to the end. So just bring it up if there's any questions. So I'm two parts to this. One is any questions that you want to put through the chat that one of us can either respond to or follow up on. The other is if something I mentioned at the beginning is that if there's anything that came up, so there's a demo day, and you should see that link on your outside the frame to register for that. That's next Friday, the 28th, where we're actually going to do some demoing. Um, no sales, just hey, here's AVD environment. We're going to do some demos, but we would like to get input. What do you want to see? What are some questions? We'll go through, the basics, but if there's any, burning questions or something that's like, well, here's something that we need in our environment, or can it do this? Go ahead and send that through. So either send that through the chat or, register for the event, reach out to us. We're not hard to find. Um, but I'll just kind of give it, a couple minutes, but in the meantime, this was great, Mark, Randy. I think it's always good to go through tech and
Yeah.
then uh, share experiences and expertise uh, across our XenTegra team.
I just
I was going
So
to say
yep.
there is a
got
couple
an
of
answer for
questions.
Bill too.
Okay,
More questions
Okay,
there, but I
great.
did find I logged into my Nerdio session because I was curious about what we're calling these what the actual machine that we're using. We're using a D4S V5, it's 4 cores and 16 gigs of RAM, and we're using the E10 storage, which is 128 gig standard SSD when they're turned on. When they're turned off, we migrate it down to lower cost disks. But yeah, that's the baseline. I put it in the chat too, if anybody's interested. That's the one that we use as our baseline for any AVD session. Thing works great. I can usually get between 3 and 5 people on that every time, and no one ever complains about performance. It runs good.
We did have a couple of other questions I was going to mention that I thought would be great just to kind of call out. Someone asked, does AVD work with Azure Local? Right. So I've already answered the question, stated yes, it does. Andy, I don't know if you want to hit on any of the, sort of potential considerations with that, but
Yeah, no, I think it's good to expand on that a little bit with so it's Azure Local. So honestly, I think a lot of it comes from either using, if you're used to Citrix on-prem or partial, Citrix on-prem, or you have applications where, you need the desktops real close to the applications. You can still leverage that with Azure Local, where you can, provision everything in the cloud, but you can take the desktops and put them closer, put them in your data center, colo, or office, whatever you need. There's a lot of flexibility with Azure Local. So it can either be for um, uh, reasons of speed, or sometimes you need specialized hardware that you actually want to run those desktops. That gives you that flexibility too. There's a whole myriad of things that you can, um, different machine types that you can leverage in Azure, but it gives you flexibility beyond that if needed. So it can be, or it can also have to do with geography, as far as making sure that, there's certain resources that stay where you want them to be in the world. We'll put it that way. Obviously, there's, you can set the regions within Azure and whatnot, but if you need more control over that, Azure Local provides that for AVD. It's been around a little while. AVD support did come out more recently, but now that really, I think it closes a gap that was there because it was like, yeah, this is good, except I've got these things that really need to be, in my office or in my data center. You can do that. So.
Good. I also had another question. Does AVD have a similar feature such as Citrix app layering, right? And so I've kind of already answered this as well, that natively AVD supports MSI app attach for deploying applications, right? Or attaching applications to your session host. They also support natively Liquidware Flex app, right? So if you are utilizing it, you can deploy Flex apps as well to your session host. Of course, if you're using Nerdio, there's the integration with Intune, right? So there's some integration there if you have an app catalog to deploy applications as well. But there isn't anything outside of natively within AVD, right? Outside of MSI X app attach. And they do have that integration with Liquidware Flex app. So hopefully that answers the question. We also had another question around, does Nerdio work with AWS workspaces? And unfortunately, no. Nerdio is Microsoft only, right? So AVD into 365. So one last question that I see here that just came up. Is there much really relevant at all in leaving mature Citrix environments? We've been on Citrix VDI for about 10 years. You guys want to take that one or should I?
I have my opinion, but I'm not sure it's gonna go over like a lead balloon there.
Okay, go ahead.
But I'm gonna say it anyways. I think that it's a cost savings initiative, right? If we're all akin to what's happening with Citrix right now and some of the price increases and they're limited of flexibility depending, on customer size. So if you're not a large enterprise player, a lot of times you're kind of being left in the cold a little bit from Citrix and the pricing is going up. AVD seems to be an off-ramp for Citrix people that is being utilized a lot. I love Citrix too, so I try to be careful about what I say, but I do see a lot of customers asking for this and going down this route as an alternative. There's a couple out there, but yeah, AVD seems to be one of the ones that I'd say more the medium, larger customers that I deal with personally are looking at AVD as an off-ramp to Citrix.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, right? Typically, it's more around not necessarily features. It's more from a cost savings perspective, potentially, right? And there's things to consider in that regard. Of course, there are customers using Citrix on-prem as well as using Citrix to manage Windows 11 multi-session. So
it's a great point.
I think there's really a lot of variables at play there. It really kind of comes down to each organization and their requirements. Yeah. But
so are you saying it depends?
It depends. Yeah. That's the technical. That's the technical.
Yeah. Citrix has some abilities and some third-party integrations that are just not there in AVD quite yet, right?
Right.
And I think that's a lot of the limiting factor for some folks.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to ask yourself, is it going to fit? Is it going to work for my need? That's really the key.
Yep. And it's what you're using, right? If you're using the Citrix stack and you're using a lot of the other add-ons like Workspace Environment Manager and, I know we mentioned app layering was mentioned here. Maybe that sort of scenario, maybe you still use Citrix, maybe use Windows 11 multi-session in Azure, right? Still using Citrix to manage that. Some customers that have basic Citrix deployments, that's where maybe the AVD makes more sense for them. So
seasonal employees or even bursting, right? I think
exactly.
Environment for capacity expansion is great, right? Being able to quickly spin up a couple multi-session servers because you have a project that you need to deal with. It's a nice alternative, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So there, a lot of variables involved with that. And we're of course happy to help you, work through that. And that's what we do. So, you know, we're happy to follow up on that, answer any other questions. Again, hope to just to kind of close up here. I don't think there's any other questions at the moment, but it doesn't necessarily have to stop. But again, thanks for attending. Please attend the demo day, which again is next Friday, the 28th. If you want to see a little bit more of this hands-on, but thank you for your time. Hope this was valuable, and we'll have more webinars like this coming. And feel free to reach out with any questions and sign up for some conferences. We'll help you with that. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Mark.